Your brain has an expiration date. And when I'm talking about dementia, I'm talking about the raw cognitive horsepower that makes someone sharp, fast, dangerous. The ability to learn new skills quickly, solve problems nobody solved before, and innovate on the fly. Neuroscientists call it fluid intelligence, and it's the single biggest advantage a human brain can have. But it doesn't last forever. The research shows that it peaks somewhere between your late 20s and mid 30s. After that, it starts sliding downward, which means right now, millions of people are sitting on a cognitive goldmine, and most of them are using it to make someone else rich. Now, if you're past 35 and this sounds like bad news, stick with me, because there's a second curve. One that does the opposite, it rises with age, and it might be even more powerful than the first one. A Harvard professor named Arthur Brooks wrote a book that maps out exactly what's happening inside the brain at every stage of life. What to do while you're in your prime, what happens when the transition hits, and why the people who navigate it well end up happier than they were at the peak. The book is called From Strength to Strength, and it might be the most useful thing I've ever read. I'm going to break down the key concepts and how I'm personally applying the concepts in real time, because I almost learned this lesson too late. Almost. In case we haven't met, my name is Matt Diggity. I've built multiple 7- and 8-figure businesses over the last 15 years. I started out as an electrical engineer, pivoted into entrepreneurship, and went on an absolute tear for about a decade. And for about a decade, things were incredible. I left my engineering job in my early 30s and started directing my own brain and my own problems. And something just clicked. Learning SEO from scratch, building systems nobody had built, solving problems on the fly. Every single day felt like a puzzle I was personally designed to crack. It was the most productive flow state of my entire life, and after reading this book, I finally understood why. That decade lined up almost perfectly with what the science says is the peak window for fluid intelligence. I didn't know it at the time, I just knew it felt like my brain was on fire in a good way. But the book doesn't just explain the peak and how to capitalize on it. It also explains what happens after, and that part, that's where it saved me. Now, real quick ask before we dive in. This is a new format for me. Deep dives into books that actually changed how I think. If this is your kind of content, hit the like button so I know to keep making these. It genuinely helps more than you think. All right, let's dig deeper into this first curve because this is the one with the timer on it. Fluid intelligence is the ability to reason quickly, think abstractly, solve novel problems, and learn new things fast. It's raw brain power. It's what makes a 26-year-old pick up Python in 2 weeks. It's what makes a first-time founder see patterns a veteran missed. It's the thing that powered basically every startup and tech revolution you can think of. There's actually data on this from the business world. Research on CEO performance shows that the most effective CEOs tend to be in their mid-30s to early 40s. Why? Because that's the intersection of peak fluid intelligence and enough expertise to apply it intelligently. Before that, you don't have enough reps. After that, the raw horsepower starts dropping. Peak brain power plus enough experience to wield it. That's the sweet spot. Now here's the part that should make some people uncomfortable. Most people spend their fluid intelligence years working for someone else, learning what someone else needs them to learn, solving someone else's problems, executing someone else's vision. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, especially early on when you're building skills and credibility, but there's a cost that nobody talks about. You're burning your peak cognitive years on someone else's dream, and fluid intelligence is a non-renewable resource. You can't stockpile it. You can't save it for later. Whatever you're pointing it at right now, that's what it's being used for. And I got to experience both sides of this. When I was an engineer, I was learning constantly, but I was learning what the company needed me to learn. The moment I jumped into entrepreneurship and started directing that same brain power at my own problems, everything changed. The speed of learning, the quality of decisions, the flow state. It was like my brain had been running at 60% and someone finally uncapped it. Same brain, same intelligence, just pointed in a different direction. This isn't just Arthur Brooks' opinion. Psychologist Raymond Cattell established the fluid intelligence framework back in the 1960s, and it's been replicated extensively since. Studies consistently show fluid intelligence peaking in the late 20s to mid 30s with measurable decline after that. The data is robust across cultures, professions, and demographics. Your brain is genuinely doing something different at 28 than it is at 48. Neither is better, they're just built for different things. So what do you do with this? Look, I'm not saying that everyone needs to quit their jobs tomorrow. But the book makes a point that's hard to ignore. The things that require fluid intelligence, like learning new industries, building new skills, creative problem solving, and innovating from scratch, those things get harder with every passing year. Not impossible, harder. And the people who direct that energy towards their own goals during the peak window have an enormous advantage. So the question isn't whether you're smart enough. It's whether you're aiming your intelligence at the right target while the window's still open. But before we get into the second curve, I need to tell you what happens when the winds stop hitting. Because even before the cognitive decline hits, there's something else that gets you first. Alright, so you've been winning for a while. Fluid intelligence is humming, business is growing. And then one day, the winds stop feeling like wins. Here's what happens. When you're climbing, every milestone releases dopamine. Your first client, your first 5-figure month, your first hire, your first exit. It all feels massive. But as you keep succeeding, the bar keeps moving. The same wins that used to light you up become routine. You need bigger and bigger hits to feel the same thing. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. Brooks calls it the striver's curse. Here's his definition. People who strive to be excellent find their inevitable decline terrifying, their successes increasingly unsatisfying, and their relationships lacking. Terrifying, unsatisfying, lacking. Wow, that's the reward for being ambitious. And here's what makes this dangerous. This emotional decline can hit well before any cognitive decline. Your brain might still be sharp as hell, but the rewards have gone flat. The dopamine's dried up, and you're left standing in the middle of a successful life wondering why it feels so empty. That's not a brain problem, that's a meaning problem. And I know because I hit it face first. In March 2023, I had just gotten back from one of the biggest work trips of my life. Flew to Poland to visit my agency office, launched a new AI tool, and spoke at a conference, back to back to back. A year earlier, this kind of trip would have fueled me for weeks. But when I got home, I felt empty. Not tired, empty. The dopamine just wasn't there. I remember sitting on my couch thinking, I genuinely don't want to do any of this anymore. The businesses were fine, the numbers were good, but the feeling of building something, that fire in my chest was gone. My first instinct was to quit everything. Burn it all down, classic midlife crisis move. But then I read this book, and Brooks gave me a framework for what was happening. It wasn't that my brain had slowed down, it was that the game I'd been playing, build more, achieve more, win more, had a built-in ceiling on fulfillment. The striver's curse. The better you are at the game, the less satisfying it becomes. That realization alone was worth the price of the book. But here's what makes this even more urgent. Because according to science, the emotional flatline is just the first wave. The second wave is the actual cognitive decline, the fluid intelligence drop we talked about. So high achievers get hit twice. First, the rewards stop landing, then the fast twitch brain power that got you there starts fading. And if you don't have a plan for either of those transitions, you end up in a very dark place. Brooks describes the specific fears that show up during this phase. Fear of losing your professional network, because when you're no longer the guy with momentum, people stop calling. Fear of earning less, not because you need the money, but because it's how you kept score your entire life. And the big one, fear of not being remembered. But that's true for everybody, and here's a reality check. The truth is, nobody's gonna remember you. Even your own family, 2 generations from now, will barely know your name. Can you name your own great-grandparents? Do you know what they accomplished, what they sacrificed, what kept them up at night? Exactly. So if legacy is your scoreboard, that's a game with no winner. Alright, I know, this got dark fast. We went from your brain has an expiration date to no one's gonna remember you in about 4 minutes. I promise the video gets happier from here. Because the real question the book is asking is what actually are you playing for? And the answer is in the second curve. The second type of intelligence is called crystallized intelligence. This is the ability to use a stock of accumulated knowledge and experience. It's not about learning new things fast, it's about knowing which things matter. Think wisdom, pattern recognition, teaching, mentoring, strategic thinking, advising. And here's the wild part. Crystallized intelligence increases through your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it barely declines at all, even into very old age. So your brain isn't getting worse, it's getting different. The raw speed decreases, but the depth of understanding increases. Brooks uses a great example to illustrate this shift. Johann Sebastian Bach. In the first half of his career, Bach was a pure innovator. Groundbreaking compositions, fluid intelligence on full display. But as he aged, his most enduring and famous works became his instructional pieces. The teaching compositions, the work that trained the next generations of musicians. He didn't decline, he evolved, and his second act was arguably more impactful than his first. That's a graceful jump between curve 1 and curve 2. When you make that jump consciously, you end up in a better place than you were at the peak. Quick sidebar for anyone thinking, I'm 25, why do I care about curve 2? 2 reasons. 1, knowing what's coming changes what you build now. The people who transition best into the second curve aren't the ones who stumble into it at 50. They're the ones who are quietly building the foundations for it in their 30s, developing relationships, collecting experiences that will eventually become wisdom, keeping one eye on where the brain is going. 2, the earlier you plan for the second curve, the more prepared you'll be. Most people get blindsided by that transition. You can be the one that saw it coming. Here's the problem. Most high achievers refuse to make the transition. They keep on grinding on curve 1, pushing harder, working longer, trying to brute force the same results with a brain that's no longer optimized for that kind of work. And they burn out. Or worse, they succeed just enough to stay trapped. The book is very clear on this. The second curve isn't a consolation prize, it's actually a better life. But only if you stop clinging to the first one. This is exactly what I'm living right now. Starting a new business, and 10 years ago, I would have been the CEO. In every meeting, running on caffeine and sheer force of will. This time I'm hiring a CEO, because I've realized my highest value isn't in the trenches anymore, it's the 30,000 foot view. The accumulated pattern recognition, the experience. Honestly, it's hard for me to tell if I learn things slower now. I live with myself, and I can't go back in time and compare. But I know I have less raw energy than I did a decade ago. And instead of fighting that, I'm designing around it. That's the jump. That's what Curve 2 looks like in practice. Now this next concept I literally think about every day, and it applies whether you're 25 or 65. Most people think satisfaction means continually getting what you want. More money, more wins, more status, always climbing, never enough. That's the default operating system for ambitious people, and it's a trap. Brooks offers a better equation. Satisfaction equals what you have divided by what you want. Read it again. Satisfaction equals what you have divided by what you want. Most people spend their entire lives trying to increase the top number. Get more, achieve more, have more. But mathematically and practically, there's a much faster lever. Decrease the bottom number. Want less. Not in a give up on life way, in a stop chasing things that don't actually make you happy way. This is ancient wisdom in a math equation. Buddhists call it non-attachment. Stoics call it the dichotomy of control. Minimalists call it intentional living. Brooks just put a denominator on it. And here's where it can go haywire. The book points out that most people unconsciously define success as having more than other people, and failure as having less, which means your satisfaction is permanently held hostage by someone else's Instagram. You could have $10 million and feel broke because some bro you don't even know has 50. That's not a money problem, that's a denominator problem. Here's a test I started running on myself straight from the book. Look at your goals, all of them. Now strip away every ounce of prestige. Nobody will know you achieved it. Nobody will be impressed. Which goals do you still want? Those are the real ones. Everything else is someone else's dream living rent-free in your head. I started doing this about a year ago, not wanting less in general, but getting brutally honest about which wants were actually mine and which were ambient pressure. Society, social media, other entrepreneurs flexing lifestyles I don't even want. And once you start filtering for that, the noise drops dramatically and your satisfaction goes through the roof. Write down your top 5 goals right now. Next to each one, ask, would I still want this if no one ever knew I achieved it? Anything that's a no, that's serving your ego and not your life. Drop it or downgrade it. Watch what happens to your baseline contentment when you stop chasing things you never actually wanted. Manage the denominator. The math does not lie. Alright, so we know the brain shifts. We know the satisfaction trap. But what do you actually do about it? Brooks says the second curve should center on teaching, mentoring, and counsel. Not because those things sound noble, but because crystallized intelligence is literally built for them. Your brain wants to do this work. It's optimized for it. Fighting against that is like entering a truck in a Formula 1 race. Wrong vehicle, wrong track. And here's a critical distinction. The second curve's focus should not revolve around accumulating more money, power, or prestige. The work itself needs to be the reward. If you're teaching to build a platform, or mentoring to network, or advising to feel important, you're still in the first curve wearing a different costume. The work is the reward, not what the work gets you. I've been coaching entrepreneurs on business for over a decade, but about a year ago I started doing something different. Personal development coaching. Not just how to grow your business, but how to build a genuinely happy life. Hardly anyone knows I do it. It's not a big revenue driver. And it feels incredible, like I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And all those years of building, failing, burning out, rebuilding, that's not wasted experience. It's the raw material for the second curve. So what makes the advice worth something? You don't throw away the first half, you distill it into the second. Now I'll be honest, I push back on Brooks a little bit here. He's pretty firm that the second curve shouldn't chase money, power, or prestige, and I mostly agree. But part of me still wants to build something at scale. Not for the ego, but because I think I can help a lot of people and I have the skills and experience to do it. Is that ego or is that purpose? I genuinely wrestle with that, but I keep coming back to the same test. Would I do this if no one ever knew it was me? And the answer keeps being yes, so I'm trusting that for now. Ask yourself, what do I know that other people need? Not what you can sell, not what you can monetize, whatever you lived through and figured out the hard way that would genuinely help someone else. That's your second curve material. Start there, even if it's small, even if it's just one conversation. The vehicle doesn't have to be a business, it just has to be real. Now, Brooke makes the argument that as you move through life, whether you're building your first business or transitioning to your second act, relationships need to become the primary source of meaning. Not achievements, not status, people. And not just your spouse or kids, Real, deep, intentional relationships across your entire life. Most ambitious people have wide networks and shallow connections. They know hundreds of people but confide in almost nobody. They talk about deals and strategy but almost never about purpose, doubt, fear, what they actually want out of life. That's a loneliness problem disguised as a popularity problem. The fix isn't more connections, it's deeper ones. Start talking about the real stuff. Purpose, what scares you, what you actually want. Most people are starving for exactly this kind of conversation. They're just waiting for someone else to go first. Be the person that goes first. Now, Brooks asked a question that hit me hard. What do you want people to say at your funeral? Not your LinkedIn summary, not your net worth. What do you want the people who actually knew you to say about who you were? Nobody's saying, he had great Q4 revenue. They're saying, he showed up for me. She made me feel like I mattered. That's the stuff that compounds. And unlike fluid intelligence, it doesn't peak. Relationships aren't a side quest. It's the main storyline. We just forget that when we're busy grinding. The book also makes a case for having a spiritual practice. And we're not really talking about religion here. He means having something. Meditation, contemplation, journaling, prayer, whatever works for you. Something that connects you to something bigger than your to-do list. Something that reminds you the point of being alive isn't your quarterly revenue. Brooks frames this as a non-negotiable in the second half of life. Because without it, in relationships, you're left with nothing except achievements and comparisons. And we already know how that ends. For me, the shift happened naturally. As the grind stopped delivering, the inner work started calling louder. I went deep, therapy, meditation, and a lot of reading. A lot of sitting with the questions I've been too busy to ask for 15 years. And that work turned out to be the thing that actually rebuilt me after the burnout. Not a new business, not a new strategy, the inner stuff. The irony is that the inner work made me better at my actual work. More focused, less reactive, better decisions. It's the best ROI I've ever found. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more videos just like this one.